So welcome back. Good morning. We're going to draw my friend John today in side view and front view. We'll probably make the front view a separate video though. This is good practice for our self-portraits. And we are going to begin with the cranium. I recommend that you put your paper next to the screen and try to draw this sight size, which means your drawing should be about the same size as John appears on the screen. And I'll do a little bit of annotation so you can see what we're thinking about here. Remember, the bottom of the cranium is going to be about level with the bottom of the nose. So this is what we have so far. This half circle, another half circle, and space in the middle. And near the bottom of that space is the ear hole. So that's what we got so far. At 3 o'clock is going to be this very gentle protuberance of the brow ridge. This space from the top of the cranium to the brow ridge is about equal to the brow ridge to the bottom of the nose. And then this last space is also equal to these upper two. So this is our thirds that we're dividing the head into. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to drop the line of the face straight down from the brow ridge. And we're going to build the features around that line. So that's the line of the face, like that. Hopefully this is all getting familiar enough that it's not too challenging. The hinge of the jaw is right in front of the ear hole, and the jawline goes up about 15 degrees to the angle and forward about 15 degrees. So forward and up, and that brings us to the angle of the jaw about there. And while we're at it, we can go ahead and put in the throat. Notice the throat goes down as the jaw goes up. And then before we get to the angle, we're going to slope forward. Human necks always slope forward. And usually the back of the neck is roughly parallel to the front. In this case, though, it's a little more vertical. And that's sort of the scaffolding that we're going to build this face on. It won't hurt to go ahead and throw in the hoodie. And again, our major proportions that we've done so far are thirds, 1, 2, 3. And our major landmarks are ear hole and brow ridge. And then the chin at the bottom of the line of the face. So I'm going to clean this up now. And moving forward, we really want to use our angle measuring skills because we've got a very important angle going on here, which looks to be about 30 degrees from vertical. And we have a very important angle here from the tip of the nose to the chin, which seems slightly, no, it's also about 30 degrees. Maybe a little less. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the bottom of the brow ridge, and we're going to go forward about 30 degrees. And when you're working on your self-portrait, you can use the vis-a-vis markers and draw right on the screen if it helps you. You can make some of these construction lines. The chin comes out just a little bit past the line of the face, and then the intersection of these two lines is a little bit above the bottom of the nose, and we end up with this sort of triangle in between. Like that. Now we're going to take that tip of the nose and make it a little rounder. Again, it's useful sometimes to visualize the size circle you could fit inside the tip of the nose and use that to create the degree of curvature that you have there. And here comes the tricky part. So we're going to zoom in a little. A lot of you are still in the habit of believing that the back of the nose is sort of where the philtrum starts. So you kind of draw this. And then you draw your nose and it ends up looking really weird because it's just like way too long. Okay, so I want you to look carefully at what you're seeing here. What we have basically is the philtrum cutting down way out in front of the line of the face and creating this little curve. And the mouth is right where we expect it. It's 1/3 of the way down between the bottom of the nose and the bottom of the chin. So let's mark that third so we know where we're aiming for. And here's the upper lip. It's this little undercut. The bottom lip comes out a little less far than the upper lip. And there's this little straightaway under the bottom lip, and then we go right into the curve of the chin, which we already drew. So to most of you, this is going to look really weird because this distance here to here looks way too small to be a nose. But the thing I want to keep emphasizing is that half the nose is behind the philtrum. So we're going to do this little teardrop nostril, and then we're going to pull all the way back to the line of the face for the ala. Mm-hmm. And I will pause right here and come around and check how you're doing. So the last thing that's going to really help this is we're going to draw the line between the lips, which comes down about back as far as the line of the face, like that. I'll zoom out a little bit now over here so we can check our work. We're not really going to analyze it for a likeness yet. We're just sort of analyzing structure. The last thing we have to place here is the eye. And we're always looking for the eye under the indent at the bottom of the brow ridge. So remember, there's that indent, and here's the eye level. So here's the indent here. Eye level is going to be about here, which should end up being around the middle of the head. And to figure out how far back to make the eye, there's a couple ways we could think about it. Notice that you could fit almost 2 whole eyes between the eye that we have to draw on the bridge of the nose, so it's pretty far back. Another way to do it would be to we could look for a parallel. So if we go from the back of the eye to the back of the ala, you see how that's about parallel to the angle of the nose? So let's try it that way and see how that works. We're going to just make a parallel line here. And then we're going to use fractional thinking to make the eye the right size. So we've got, if this line is, this line should be about 2.5 times the size of an eye, so that puts the eye about here. Hopefully that made a little bit of sense. If we made the eye too big, it would end up being too close to the bridge of the nose. We're going to analyze the structure of the eye a little bit close up now. Notice that the upper lid comes way out past the front of the eye. And you can pretty clearly see in this photograph that thing we've talked about, which is that the iris is clear, and so the pupil ends up being towards the back of it, like that. And the eyebrow kind of follows the bottom margin of the brow ridge. And we're just going to shadow map that and put in a little tone. And we simplified the line of the nose into a straight line, but now that we're a little further along, we can see that there are some plane changes in the nose. There's a slight rise towards the middle, and then goes into like that. So very subtle, but still important. Remember, your brain's capable of detecting very, very small details in human faces, which is why if you had a good friend you hadn't seen since middle school and they got a nose job and you saw them at the beach, you would immediately recognize that they got a nose job. And I'm going to make one slight edit here and I'm going to make the chin just a little stronger in my drawing. Again, we're making corrections that amount to about, a 1/16 of an inch. Okay, now we're going to zoom out and see how we're doing. Well, we're going to do a lot of editing at the end. Right now, let's just keep going. So we're looking for the bottom of the ear to be level with the bottom of the nose, roughly. And I can check that. His ear's coming down a little further than that. So there might have been a slight angle to his head. So we're going to place the ear between these two lines. This is a little bit below the bottom of the nose. This is a little bit below the top of the eye. And the ear lobe, which is attached on John, is down below the ear hole. And the shape of the ear is like this. Notice that the overall form of the ear is on a diagonal like this. It's almost parallel to the nose, not quite as shallow. And now we're going to draw some ear details from observation. See if we can recognize all these forms. Now, the fact that we can see down into his ear hole is because his tragus is not very prominent. See, there's that little bump there for the tragus. Normally, the tragus sort of more covers the ear hole, but John's antitragus is actually larger than his tragus. And now here's the part that most people have the most trouble with for some reason, is understanding that the helix starts right in the middle of the ear. You see the beginning of the helix is right here, and then we're going to curve up and around. And then we're going to fade out as we get behind the antitragus. So we're going like this, up and around, and then we're fading down behind the antitragus, like that. Notice that I'm using, to indicate that fade, I'm turning my line into what's called a broken line or a dotted line. And the last step is to go from the antitragus, and we're hooking around behind the helix and popping a little shadow in there, another little shadow here. This is called the triangular fossa. Everyone's got this little dent in their antihelix right there. We can pop a little shadow in under the ear to make it lift off the side of the face slightly. If you don't have time to do the shading, don't worry about it. And now we're going to look at the head shape. Notice John's head is sort of straight up the back. This is called blocking things in. We thought of the head at first in terms of curves, but right now it's probably, what I'm seeing is a series of straight sections. And when you can break something down into straight sections, you can do a better job of drawing it, because now you're seeing angles and distances, which we've trained ourselves to see. It's easier than analyzing curves. So see what I'm doing? I'm just blocking in the shape of the hair. This hair is not extremely full-bodied, so I'm not going too far above the shape I did for the skull, just a little bit. And the first objective here is just to think of the hair in terms of this simple blocked-in shape. And that's how you're going to handle it on your self-portraits too. Doesn't matter if your hair is curly or long or short, or straight. We're always going to just try to think of it as if you were drawing the coastline of a country on a map. Sort of like that. And I can see that I need to come up just a little higher in the back. And because his hair is darker than his skin, obviously, we're going to do a first shading. If you're right-handed, you're going the other way, please. And we're going to erase some of our construction lines. I'm going to come around again in a minute. We're getting close to being done with this. And remember, when you do your self-portrait, you're going to have several class periods to do what we just did in about half an hour, so you're going to do a better job. And I'm going to shadow map the shadow under the chin. And there's only a few other shadow shapes. There's a shadow under the ala and under the tip of the nose. And a little shadow inside that. There's usually on the human face a pretty deep shadow in the inside corner of the eye. That's where you're really talking about the shadow of the inside of the eye socket. And I'm going to continue now with my first shading over my entire shadow map. Back of the neck and the throat are the main shadow shapes. When you're shading a person, you got to understand that your brain understands light better than you do. So basically, when you put in your first few shadow shapes, your brain is going to say, I just gave this person a mustache. This looks terrible. And then you'll want to erase it. That's because when you put in the first couple shapes, your brain can't yet understand that those are shadows because your brain expects to see shadows elsewhere. If you just have the courage to keep going and add the rest of the shadows, by the time you've put them all in, your brain is going to understand, oh, there's a light source, and these are not mustaches or beards, these are shadows. So your first shadow when you put it in is always going to look wrong to you, and you just have to sort of power through, not let it bother you, and do that first shading everywhere, at which point your brain's going to say, oh yeah, I get it, there's light on this thing. So I can see that I've got a little problem. This is where it looks enough like him that I can start to edit things a little bit. Little problem with the curve of the nose. So a question I get all the time is, how do you draw hair? We already did the hardest part, which is just blocking it in and first shading. The directional shading of the hair, which makes it look like hair, is second shading, not first. And what I always tell students is don't do this right from the start. Like a lot of people want to just draw the draw the person, and then they want to like put hairs in one at a time, and that's how you create the effect of a kind of a sad doll head. That's not what we see in a living person. What we see is an overall value, and then we see some accents, usually the shadow accents that we add last follow the direction the hair is growing. But if you don't support your hair drawing with that first shading, it's going to look really sad and weird. And we're not concerned with doing a ton of hair detail. We're just trying to give the general effect. And you can see I've pretty much got it. We want to like feather across edges like this so it doesn't look like a toupee or a wig. And that's about it. We want to maybe break up this edge a little to make it a little rounder. But I'm not going to do a whole lot more with the hair. And one thing that we always want to look for when we can find it is a little bit of reflected light under the throat. And this is where our practice in drawing spheres and cylinders should come in handy, because we're going to shade over this edge as if we were shading an egg or a sphere and feathering these lines through the core shadow like this. And then we're going to shade this cast shadow a little darker as well, like this. And you see what happens with just a very subtle reflected light in between. It really gives you a sense that we're looking, you know, that this surface is projecting, is curving under. We might see a little bit of reflected light under the nose as well, so we can shade, first shading under here and then a little darker through the core shadows and a little shadow accent here. And that's going to about do it for our side view. The very last step, if you're so inclined, is the halftones. Notice that everything in the photograph that is in light, I've just left white paper for now. There are some changes going on in here, though. We can see, for example, a little darkening under the cheekbone. So we can see a little darkening around the eye socket. The key there is you want to use your very, very lightest pressure, because any halftone you shade cannot compete with the darkness of your shadows. So you got to barely touch the paper, because when you squint, and I hope everyone knows how to get their eyes a little bit out of focus, which is what squinting means. You can do it just by turning your eyes into little slits like this. That's why we call it squinting. But when you get your eyes out of focus and you look at your drawing, you want the halftones to merge with the rest of the lights and not to merge with your shadows. And you'll know if you went too dark on your halftones and you squint at your drawing, your halftones are going to start to look like they're part of the shadows and not part of the light. The final consideration I'm going to mention in this drawing has to do with coloration. We need to have enough of a value contrast between the skin and the hair in order to make it look like he's basically a white guy with pretty dark hair. Like there's a big, and that difference is called a local color difference. It doesn't have to do with the effects of light and shadow. It has to do with the effects of coloration or pigmentation. That's why when we start shading, we always start with drawing things that are gray on a gray background, because then we're not dealing with the effects of local color. But now we're drawing someone who has relatively pale skin and dark hair, and so we need to account somewhat for those differences. And if we don't shade the hair dark enough, basically John will look blonde, which he isn't. And if we shade the hair too dark, he will look like jet black brunette, which he also isn't. And it's important to realize that the values that we use in a drawing are affected by both of these factors, local color and light. So that's going to about do it for the side view. Last thing I'm going to do is just shade the white of the eye a little bit. A lot of people resist doing that, again, because the local color of the white of the eye is white. A lot of beginners think they need to leave it white in their drawing. Well, you don't. If white is in shadow, it's going to be gray in your drawing. Just like, obviously, the underneath of his throat is white, but we shaded it in the drawing because it's in shadow. And the same thing applies to the white of the eye. Little half tone in the ear, and then we're going to call it a day for this one. And the front view will be in the companion video soon to be posted.